This country loved having special events and traditions, and even the back part of the palace had a place to hold them. Usually this area wasn't decorated much, but the palace workers had worked hard to get it ready for this funeral quickly. About once a year, Gyukai was supposed to lead a ceremony, but so far Maomao hadn't seen her do it during their time working together. These jobs were usually done by men, but in the back part of the palace, women could also have these jobs. The job went from one important woman to the next. People at the funeral stood in 2 lines in front of the altar. They were given flowers by women who looked like helpers to the woman who had died. Maomao stood with Hongyang and took a flower from one of the ladies. It didn't smell quite right, not like flowers usually do. Maybe everything in the palace was a little different. Maomao noticed the lady's hand was red when she gave her the flower. Was that a bumpy rash? The woman's hand looked quite puffy. Maomao looked at her own left arm. One of the old marks on it looked similar to the woman's puffiness. She was still thinking about this as she walked to the altar to give her flower. There was a big coffin covered with a white cloth. Maybe they would move the body later. Through the cloth, Maomao could just see the shape of a person inside. Hongyang said the woman who died was the daughter of an important official. She was a well-known consort among the others, but Maomao thought from how Hongyang spoke that the woman wasn't very well liked. About a year earlier, she had begun to get sick. She stayed in her room a lot, but didn't return to where her family lived. The emperor didn't come to see her. Hongyang said with a little bit of sharpness in her voice that she could have gone home if she had wanted to. Then, just when the lady was feeling her worst, the weather got warm and she got sick from her food. It was strange to see usually careful Hongyang act so rough with the dead person. When they left the flower line, Maomao asked quietly, did she do something wrong? It was just a simple question, and she didn't really expect Hongyang to answer. It was a lot for the helper to know, but Hongyang quietly said, do you remember when someone tried to poison Lady Gyukai? They never figured out who did it, but Hongyang looked at the coffin. Now it all made sense. Hongyang really cared for her mistress and would be upset with anyone she thought tried to hurt her. Maybe she was even a little glad the woman had died. Then Maomao had an idea. This consort had tried to harm Gyukai before she died from the bad food. Gyukai was now pregnant, so she was being extra careful around the other women in the palace. Jinshi asked Maomao to find all the poisonous mushrooms the day before. He was careful that Gyukai and the others didn't know what he wanted. If you didn't think about how the people in the Jade Pavilion felt, it was hard to know if Gyukai had poisoned the middle consort before the consort could poison her. Everyone said Jinshi had food poisoning, and it made sense if he'd eaten a bad mushroom. Maomao thought about what the other women at the Jade Pavilion would think if they knew what Jinshi was really thinking. Even the handsome eunuch might not be welcomed as warmly if they found out his secret. Maomao sometimes wondered if Jinshi really favored Gyukai, but he was being very fair in this situation. Maomao didn't think Gyukai was directly involved. She might not have liked the other consort, but there were many ways to make someone feel defeated without directly attacking them. Trying to poison someone to protect yourself felt like a lot of work. You could easily get caught. Also, Hongyang and the other 3 girls in the Jade Pavilion didn't seem like they would use sneaky tricks. If someone at the Jade Pavilion tried to poison someone, most people would guess it was Maomao. Well, if Jinshi wanted to see how Maomao would react to the mushrooms, Maomao wasn't bothered by it. She was a little bit impressed too. Maomao hadn't really done much work herself. She wondered what made the woman sick and die. Maomao would be happy to know, but she knew finding out the answer might be hard. She was walking with Hongyang back to the Jade Pavilion when a loud crash happened. She looked around and saw a woman with bandages covering her face had knocked over the altar. The rice and wine that were offered were now all over the floor. Some red and puffy skin showed from under the woman's bandages. Her clothes weren't fancy like the ladies wore, but they were made of good material, not like the simple uniforms the maids used. Maomao thought this woman wasn't just a regular palace worker or a lady's helper. Hey, one of the palace women shouted, grabbing the newcomer, but she pushed her hand away and stood by the coffin. She then pulled off the white cloth covering it. The women all gasped and cried, then quickly moved away. Even Hongyang, who didn't get scared easily, let out a little shout. A woman was lying on the floor wearing white clothes. Her face was red and puffy, and she had lost some of her hair. She looked like she had been cooked in hot oil, not a beautiful flower from the palace. The person who came into the palace smiled even with her wounds. You see now, she said, you get what you deserve. Some palace workers came to hold her still. You are uglier than I am, she laughed as the sun began to set. Maomao looked at both the dead body and the woman's face, which was covered in bandages. The wounds looked like burns and reminded her of something she had seen before. Chapter 6 Fungus from the Dead Body Part 2. The next day, Maomao found out that the woman who started the trouble at the funeral was a low-ranking wife of the emperor. She came from a wealthy family of traders and was generally cheerful. People said the emperor himself had visited her a few times, but a couple of years ago she got a strange sickness. It made her face puffy and red, and she started losing her hair. People had discussed sending her away, but she needed a husband and wouldn't find one if she returned home looking as she did. So she stayed as a minor wife, still getting paid, which everyone thought was a kind thing for the emperor to do. But the biggest mystery was why this wife showed up at the funeral, yelling and angry at the dead woman. It seemed like the illness might have been caused by the wife who died recently. The other wife got sick about 2 years ago, around the same time of year that this wife passed away. The signs of the sickness seemed familiar to Maomao. She had a feeling about what was causing it, so she went to a certain place. When she found exactly what she thought she would, she knew she was right. She was looking for a kind of very poisonous red mushroom. She gathered a piece of the mushroom, wrapping it carefully in cloth. She thought this was the mushroom Jinchi wanted to find. Maomao asked a palace worker to send a message to Gaoshun, and the next day he and Jinchi came to see her. The medical office was a good place to talk about the interesting thing they had found. The doctor bustled around making tea. A cat named Maomao cleaned her fur and then curled up for a nap. The doctor wasn't always great at making medicine, but he made a really good cup of tea. It felt a little strange to have someone smiling and offering snacks while she was dealing with a poisonous mushroom, so Maomao kindly said no thank you. He walked away and his moustache looked sad. She felt a little bad, but what else could she do? She saw him glancing at them. Sometimes he seemed a little sad, so she carefully closed the door. When she did, the doctor looked truly disappointed, but she didn't worry about it. Put this around your hands, Master Jinchi. And this is to cover your mouth. Maomao gave him and Gaoshun some cloth squares. Then she did as she said and covered her own mouth and hands. She wished she had real gloves, but she didn't have much time to find any that were thick enough. Jinchi and Gaoshun seemed unsure, but they covered themselves up like Maomao did. She brought out a wooden box. Is that all? Jinchi asked, his voice sounding quiet through the cloth. Yes, sir. It's a very poisonous mushroom. Maomao opened the box and carefully pulled back layers of cloth to show a mushroom that looked quite dangerous. It looked like a red and puffy finger. It was pretty clear you shouldn't put this mushroom in your mouth. It grew close to trees that were starting to die, and even one bite could be very dangerous. It was actually quite risky, because even a simple touch could make someone sick. I discovered it growing in a small forest in the north part of the palace. The emperor didn't go to the northern area very often, unlike the southern part of the palace where he spent a lot of time. The beautiful views weren't as important anymore, and some parts of the land weren't cared for well. Buildings were left empty, and even this nice garden area had been forgotten. Now it wasn't looking very good. It seemed these mushrooms actually liked growing there, and they started to show up everywhere. It was a bit unlucky for Maomao. She had looked all over the back part of the palace, but she was only one person and couldn't check every single spot. If she had seen the mushrooms, she definitely would have told Jinchi about them. They were very dangerous. They weren't found often, so she hadn't thought they were growing nearby until recently. If you were lucky to avoid them, that was good. If you found them, that was even better. These mushrooms can make your hand get big and puffy just from touching them, she said. And keep them away from your face, she said, or you might end up with a mark like mine. She showed us her arm, pulling back the sleeve. She had taken off some bandages, and her wrist was puffy and red. There was a raised mark on it that probably wouldn't go away completely. It really did look like the face of the younger wife, and like the mark on the arm of the woman who had given Maomao her flower. I just touched one lightly because I was curious, and this happened, Maomao said. She was just testing it like she did with many poisons she found. A few times a year she and her father would go to the mountains to gather plants for medicine, and it was during one of these trips that she had found the mushroom. Touching it hadn't been a good idea. Even a light touch made her skin puff up and turn red. When her dad saw it, he quickly put her wrist under the water, but the swelling didn't get better. I noticed you always kept that arm covered. Jinchi looked closely at Maomao, his face a little serious. He realized she hadn't shown anyone her scars before. Don't worry, sir, Maomao said. I get these scars while I'm doing my work and trying things out. She carefully rewrapped the bandage and put the funny-shaped mushroom back in its box. She would need to take care of it later. What experiments? Just things I wanted to learn about. Learn about? What did you want to learn? Jinchi's face turned pale, but Maomao wanted to finish talking quickly. Acting like she hadn't heard him, she said, the person in the coffin had a puffy face and their hair was falling out. I think she got sick from eating this mushroom. Was that what you wanted to find out, Master Jinchi? Jinchi wasn't the one who answered. It was Gaoshan, and he forced a smile. Maybe they didn't want everyone to know that the middle consort died because of a poisonous mushroom. That seemed very strange to Maomao. Can you tell me what happened? She asked. It might be better to not know, but not knowing would bother her even more. Jinchi's pretty eyebrows wrinkled and he quickly looked at Gaoshan, but Gaoshan's face didn't show any emotion, and finally Jinchi sighed. Consort Jin had been sick for almost a year before she died. Her face and head were very puffy, so it was hard for her to speak. Jinchi visited the other ladies in the palace about once a month, including Jin, who was sick. He said that every time he went to see her, he found her lying in bed, looking like she was in a lot of pain. Another lady in the palace had the same problem, and thanks to the emperor's kindness, Jin was allowed to stay in the palace with the others. Many stories were going around about Lady Jin. Her father was an important leader, and people wondered what would happen if he saw her looking the way she did. Lady Jin used to be very proud and loved to show off her father's position, but being sick made her quiet and shy. Maomao thought about this carefully. Jinchi was a very careful person. He had to pay close attention to all the women, from the most important consort to the least, during the funeral. It looked like Consort Jin had used a poisonous mushroom to harm another woman, and then tried to use it again on someone else. But she accidentally touched the mushroom herself, which left her face changed and made it unlikely the emperor would notice her anymore. She would be allowed to live in the back part of the palace as long as she didn't cause any more problems. It seemed a little harsh, but sometimes that's what you have to do in politics. Jin was a very proud woman, though. She was very unhappy with how things were going, so she finally drank poison to end her life, Jinchi said. That is what her helpers told everyone. Jinchi had 5 helpers, and they all said the same thing happened. Everything seemed to fit together well. Jinchi needed to consider all the possibilities, though. That's why he hadn't talked to Consort Gyokyo about it yet. So you wanted to know where she got the poison? Maomao asked, and Jinchi nodded. It was hard to know how Jin's father would feel when he learned his daughter had died. But if someone had been sneaky or unfair in what happened, he probably wouldn't cause a big scene. Maomao made a small sound and then took the handkerchief from her mouth to gently touch her chin while she thought. A question, sir. Does that mean she ate the poisonous mushroom wanting to end her life? Yes, that's right. But that made things even more confusing. Jin's face was very red and puffy. It would have made sense if her face had been that way for a while, but some of the puffiness looked new. This mushroom does cause swelling when it touches skin, Maomao said. I thought eating it would just make your tongue and mouth swell up. I didn't realize it could make your whole face puffy too. Is that so? Yes, it does. This mushroom can make your stomach hurt and you might throw up. It can even make it hard to move your body. The woman was very swollen, so I think someone rubbed the mushroom right on her face. Then Maomao noticed something else. The woman's hand, lying in the coffin, wasn't swollen at all. If she really wanted to die, she would have spread the mushroom all over her face. But this person, like Maomao, had tried to protect her hands. Maomao touched her chin and made a little sound as she thought. She was beginning to understand what was happening, but she didn't have solid evidence yet. Because of that, she didn't want to say too much to Jinchi. You seem to be avoiding the question, Jinchi said. He looked at her while she was thinking. He leaned very close to her, almost touching foreheads. If you want to say something, just say it. Maomao didn't find it easy to speak her mind. Instead, she looked down at the ground and asked, do you have some free time in a few days? He also wanted to borrow some strong servants who were men. He wanted men who could handle strong smells and wouldn't talk much. Jinchi looked confused by the request, but he agreed. Okay, he said. If this will help solve the problem, you can have them. I don't know if it will work, he said. That's all right, Jinchi replied. Do it, his voice made it clear what he wanted. Good, it was better this way. Maomao was just a small worker in the palace. It was easier when he treated her like that. Yes, sir, she said, bending her head. Maomao spent the next 3 days looking around, using the palace map she had studied. Starting near where Consort Jin lived, she looked everywhere for something special. The search made her dirty and messy, and the other ladies in waiting would sometimes scream when she returned to the Jade Pavilion. She started keeping an extra set of clothes at the doctor's office. Then she heard a story from the doctor and from the girls who talked a lot at the laundry room. It was about a rumor that had been going around for a few days. Even with this new information, Maomao still wasn't completely sure, but it made more sense to her than what Consort Jin's ladies had said. The day after she finished getting ready, 3 eunuchs came to see Maomao, and Gaoshun was one of them. She had asked for strong men, and she thought this one certainly was. Jinchi was busy with other things and couldn't be there. Maomao knew that even though he seemed relaxed, he was actually very busy. She sometimes thought that looking too calm could be a problem. Thank you all for coming. Maomao lowered her head and gave each of the men a shovel. 2 of the men looked a little confused, but because Gaoshun didn't say anything, they didn't ask what was happening. Maomao was happy. Someone had found men who were good at going along with things. Then she walked toward the group of trees in the north part of the area. She didn't find it where she discovered the famous poisonous mushroom, but in another forgotten spot covered with fallen leaves. The air smelled a little strange and made her nose tingle. Maomao showed where mushrooms were growing all over the ground among the leaves. Could you please dig in these spots? She asked, pointing to 3 places on the map of the back part of the palace. She came here first because she thought they were most likely to find what she needed. The palace workers used their shovels to move the fallen leaves, and then they started digging into the ground. The dirt was damp and soft underfoot. Maomao wanted to help, but Gaoshun said she didn't need to because of her leg, and she agreed with him. Luckily, her leg was finally getting better. Suddenly, one of the eunuchs made a face and covered his nose. Everyone quickly did the same. The dug-up dirt smelled strong and a little unpleasant, much stronger than the smell they noticed before. Gaoshun's eyes began to tear up. He could see a piece of cloth in the hole. Now I understand why you wanted people who didn't mind bad smells. He pushed his shovel into the ground, looking more worried than usual. He stepped on the dirt hard, flipping it with his shoe. It looks like he made good decisions, Maomao thought. One of the palace servants didn't show much feeling, while the other smiled a little sadly as they looked at what came out of the ground. Maomao was happy no one else was around. People would have probably screamed or even passed out, which would have made things much harder. So what had come out of the ground? The bones of a human hand and arm were found. Some flesh was still on them, but they had been buried for a long time. They had found a body. Is this the proof you wanted? Gaoshun asked. Maomao looked down at the bones. I was surprised I found it so quickly. That's why I had picked out 2 other places to look. Maomao felt a little sick to her stomach as the men dug up the body. Everyone knew who the dead person was. The body still had beautiful jewelry, and each piece showed the symbol of Consort Jin. Consort Jin had died about a year before. Gaoshun carefully put the body into a wooden box to use as a coffin. Then he looked at Maomao, looking very tired. The other 2 servants had finished helping and went to leave. They were probably excited to take a bath. Gaoshun promised they wouldn't tell anyone what happened, and Maomao believed him. Consort Jin died last year, Maomao said. We don't know for sure if she was murdered or if it was an accident, but her ladies-in-waiting likely knew when she died. They were talking in the doctor's office, which they had borrowed for a little while. Gaeshun held a teacup but didn't drink. He looked at Maomao and asked, "Then who did we have the funeral for?" Someone else must have known the consort had died, not just the women who helped her. Maomao took a piece of paper from her clothes. Maomao had drawn a picture of a young woman. She made the sketch after talking to the women who worked at the palace laundry about a woman who disappeared. Gaeshun looked at the drawing for a bit, then shook his head. "Have you heard about the palace woman who went missing?" Maomao asked. "Yes," Gaeshun said. "Often, these missing women were found dead after a few days, and it looked like they had ended their own lives."